The sun blazes down on the empty stretch of Highway 9, casting long shadows on the cracked asphalt as James Skullbrown rolls into the gas station, the rumble of his Harley-Davidson cutting through the calm. It's a perfect day, clear skies, the kind of day that feels like nothing could go wrong. But Skull's been around long enough to know that perfect days are often the calm before the storm. He pulls up to the pump, eyes scanning the quiet parking lot. That's when he hears it, soft, frantic whispers coming from behind the dumpster. He turns his head and freezes. A little girl, no older than 6, sitting in a wheelchair, her tiny hands gripping the wheels like she's trying to hold on to something solid in a world that's suddenly gone chaotic. Her face is pale, her wide, terrified eyes locked on him. "They hurt Mama," the girl whispers, her voice trembling as she hugs herself, the fear in her gaze as deep as the ocean. She looks so small and vulnerable, alone in the harsh sunlight, but the terror in her eyes tells him she's seen more than any child should ever have to. For Skull, the world has always been about loyalty to his club, riding free, and the rush of the road. But as he stares at the little girl in the wheelchair, something in his chest tugs, a flicker of the man he used to be, before life and the club had hardened him. Something cracks open inside him that he didn't even know was still there. In that moment, everything changes. Can Skull, a man used to living in the shadows, become the protector this girl needs? Will he finally step up and fight the monsters who destroyed her world? Before we dive deeper, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story grabs your heart, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've got something even bigger coming your way. The wind howled through the empty parking lot as James Skullbrown pulled his Harley-Davidson into the gas station. The storm had come out of nowhere, clouds rolling in fast, darkening the sky to an ominous shade of gray. The rain came down in sheets, pouring from the heavens like buckets of water. The sharp crack of thunder rattled the air, followed by flashes of lightning that split the night in half. Skull revved the engine of his bike, the low growl of the motorcycle barely audible over the roar of the storm. He was used to storms like this, the kind that came quickly and left just as fast. It wasn't the first time he had been caught in one. Hell, he was a Hell's Angels member. Storms were nothing compared to the danger he faced every day. But tonight felt different. Something about the stillness after the rain hit him in a way he couldn't explain. It was like the calm before a much bigger storm. He parked the bike beside the pumps and removed his helmet, running his hand through his soaked hair. The station was deserted. The storm had driven away any sensible person, leaving the place empty except for a few scattered trucks and a battered old sedan in the far corner. Skull wasn't planning on staying long, just enough time to fill up, grab a drink, and get back on the road. He wasn't the kind to stay in one place for too long. The life of a biker was about movement, about freedom. But tonight, there was something off in the air, an unease that kept gnawing at him. As he walked toward the door of the station, his boots slapping the wet concrete, his eyes caught a figure in the corner of the lot. A shadow, hunched and still, nestled against the side of the dumpster. Skull's instincts, honed over years of living on the edge, flared immediately. In his world, no one lingered in the shadows unless they had something to hide. Or were hiding from something. He paused. The storm was relentless, and the figure seemed so out of place, a small vulnerable shape in the middle of a storm. Skull's hardened demeanor faltered for a moment. The sight of the figure stirred something deep inside him, something he had long buried. Curiosity drew him in, despite the voice in his head telling him to walk away. He wasn't a hero. Hell, he barely cared about the people in his own life, much less a random stranger in the middle of nowhere. But tonight, something felt different. He needed to see what was going on. As he approached, the figure shifted slightly. Skull's heart skipped a beat when he saw her, a young girl, probably no older than 16, her small frame curled into a wheelchair. She was drenched from head to toe, her dark hair plastered against her face, but the worst part was the look in her eyes. Wide, terrified, and hollow. There was a deep, empty fear that only came from someone who had seen horrors no one should ever see. Skull's instincts told him to move away. There was something about her vulnerability that unsettled him. He had spent years running from responsibility, from anything that made him feel too much. The Hell's Angels had become his family, his purpose, and that was enough. People like him didn't stop for others. But there was something about this girl. The storm, the fear in her eyes, it all felt like a warning. She flinched when she saw him coming closer, her small hands gripping the armrests of her chair like they were the only thing keeping her from falling apart. Skull didn't speak at first, not wanting to frighten her any further. Instead, he crouched down to her level, his wet leather jacket creaking in the quiet. "Hey," he said gruffly, the sound of his voice nearly drowned out by the storm. "You all right?" The girl didn't answer. She just stared at him, her eyes vacant, as though she hadn't heard him. Her face was pale, too pale, her lips cracked and bloodied from the cold and rain. The more he looked at her, the more he could see the signs of trauma, the bruising on her arms, the way her shoulders hunched in fear. She wasn't just a scared, helpless girl. She had been through something terrible, something far worse than being left out in a storm. "What happened to you?" Skull asked again, his voice softer this time, almost against his own will. There was a strange tug in his chest, something he didn't recognize. It wasn't the usual indifference that came with living the biker life. This was something else, something unfamiliar. The girl still didn't speak. Instead, she shivered in place, and the sight of it hit Skull like a punch to the gut. He knew fear when he saw it. Hell, he'd been running from his own for years. But this girl? She was broken. And not just physically, something inside her had been shattered. It took a moment before Skull realized what had happened. The broken look in her eyes, the tremble in her hands. She had seen something horrific. Something that had stripped her of her innocence. A gut feeling surged through him. "Where's your family?" he asked. The girl slowly lifted her gaze, but her words were barely a whisper, so soft Skull could barely make them out. "They're gone," she choked out, her voice cracking as she spoke. "My mom, they killed her." The storm raged around them, but in that instant, everything else went quiet. Skull's breath caught in his throat. "Who did?" he asked, his voice low, his instincts kicking into overdrive. He didn't know why he felt the need to ask. There was something so raw about her, something that made him feel like he had to do something, anything, to help her. Her eyes flicked to the side, and Skull saw the terror that filled her gaze when she looked at him. "Cops," she whispered. They were involved in something. A drug thing. They killed my mom because she knew too much. I ran, but I don't know where to go." Skull's anger flared. Cops involved in a drug operation? Murdering innocent people? He was no stranger to violence, but something about this girl's pain cut deeper than any street fight he'd ever been in. "You're safe now," he muttered, more to himself than her, as he helped her out of the wheelchair and lifted her into his arms. He didn't know why he was doing it, but it felt like the right thing to do. For the first time in a long while, Skull wasn't running from responsibility. He was running toward it. The Angels of Hell's clubhouse was a world unto itself. Nestled on the outskirts of town, it sat at the end of a cracked gravel road, its exterior worn but resilient, much like the bikers who inhabited it. The air inside was thick with the smell of smoke, stale beer, and the faint scent of leather. There were no pretensions here, just raw, unfiltered life. It was a place of brotherhood, camaraderie, and for James Skullbrown, a place that had always felt like home. But tonight, as Skull walked through the familiar dimly lit hallway, carrying Amara, still trembling from the events of the night, something in the air had shifted. The usual clattering of pool balls and laughter was replaced with a heavy silence that hung over the room like a storm cloud. The members of the Angels of Hell were scattered around the clubhouse, all eyes on Skull and the girl in his arms. Amara wasn't just any ordinary girl. She was broken, shattered by the trauma of witnessing her mother's brutal murder at the hands of corrupt cops involved in a drug ring. She had been left for dead, and now, Skull had brought her into the very den of the Angels of Hell. His decision wasn't going to go unnoticed. Bear Mackenzie, the club's president and a man who had seen it all, eyed Skull with suspicion as he walked past. "What the hell is this, Skull?" Bear's deep, gravelly voice cut through the stillness of the room, halting Skull in his tracks. The other members of the club, still in their cut-off leather vests and dark jeans, turned their gaze toward him. The tension in the room could be felt in the air, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for Skull to speak. "She's staying with us, Bear," Skull said, his voice low but steady. He was used to being the wild card, the unpredictable one in the club, but this was different. This was a line he was crossing, one that would change everything. Bear narrowed his eyes, his hands resting on his hips as he stared at the girl in Skull's arms. "You're bringing a damn civilian into our clubhouse? You know how this works, Skull. We don't get involved with outside problems, especially not when law enforcement's in the mix. You're putting us all at risk." We don't need some innocent girl screwing up everything we've built. The rest of the gang murmured in agreement, some shaking their heads, others exchanging skeptical looks. Skull didn't flinch. He had seen this look from his brothers before, the resistance to change, to anything that threatened their world of rebellion. The angels of hell had lived by their own rules for years, staying outside the law and carving out their own existence. They didn't deal with civilians or get involved in the problems of the world beyond the barbed wire fence of their clubhouse. But Amara wasn't just anyone. She was different. Skull could feel it deep down in his gut, something that went beyond the loyalty he had for his club. This wasn't just about protecting a girl, it was about doing what was right, even if it meant risking everything he had known. "You don't understand, Bear," Skull said, his tone firmer now. He carefully set Amara down on the nearby couch, where she wrapped her arms around herself, her face pale and drawn. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her presence alone told the story. She witnessed her mother's murder. A mother who was killed because she had information about corrupt cops involved in a drug operation. Amara has evidence, Bear, evidence that could take down a whole network of criminals. The kind of criminals who run the city. If we don't protect her, they'll silence her. And I'm not gonna let that happen. A silence fell over the room. The angels of hell had faced their fair share of dangerous people in the past, but they had never gone up against the law itself. Corrupt cops weren't just powerful, they were untouchable. Bear took a step closer to Skull, his jaw tightening as he weighed the implications of what he had just heard. "You're asking us to go to war with law enforcement?" Bear's voice was quieter now, more contemplative. "You think they won't come for us if we protect her? You think they'll just let us walk away from this?" The room was still. Skull knew what was coming. He had seen the internal conflict in Bear's eyes. The man had always led with caution, always calculated the risks before making a move. But for Skull, this wasn't about calculation. It was about something deeper, something more personal. He wasn't about to turn his back on a girl who had no one else to turn to. "I'm asking you to trust me," Skull said, his voice firm. "I'm asking you to help me protect her. We don't let people like her slip through the cracks. Not on our watch." Bear took a long breath, the tension in the room still thick. "You're asking for a lot, Skull. We've stayed out of civilian shit for years, but if you're saying she's that important, then I'll listen. But this is a risk, and you know it." The room was heavy with the weight of the decision. Skull's brothers exchanged glances, the murmurs growing louder, but finally, Bear nodded. "All right, Skull. We'll help you protect her. But if things go south, it's on you. No one else." Skull nodded in agreement. The tension lifted, but the uncertainty still remained. Bear turned to the others. "Get the girl settled in," he said. "We'll start making a plan, but make no mistake, we're taking on the cops. And that's something none of us take lightly." As the angels of hell began to make preparations, Skull walked over to Amara and sat beside her. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with exhaustion but also a flicker of hope, the first sign of life he had seen in her since he found her behind the dumpster. "You're safe now," he said, his voice softer than he intended. "We'll protect you. No one's gonna hurt you again." For the first time, Amara gave him a small, fragile smile. It was a start, but it was enough. Skull knew this wasn't going to be easy. The angels of hell had just crossed a line they could never uncross. But for the first time in his life, Skull wasn't afraid. The Angels of Hell clubhouse was quieter than usual, the usual sounds of clinking beer bottles and boisterous laughter replaced by hushed tones and heated conversations. Skull could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on him, its pressure like a vice around his chest. As he walked through the dimly lit hallways, the eyes of his brothers followed him, some filled with doubt, others with skepticism. The decision had been made, Amara was under the Angels of Hell's protection, but the real challenge was just beginning. The Angels of Hell had always thrived on loyalty, brotherhood, and the unspoken rule of never getting involved in civilian matters. It was a hard and fast code, one that had kept them out of the crosshairs of law enforcement and avoided the kind of complications that came with dealing with civilians. But Amara was no ordinary girl. The violence she had witnessed, the threat of corrupt cops hunting her down, had pushed Skull into a corner. Now his brothers, his family, were looking to him for leadership, and some weren't so sure he was making the right choice. As the clubhouse settled into uneasy silence, Skull found himself sitting at the back of the room, staring into his half-empty bottle of whiskey. The swirling amber liquid reflected the internal turmoil tearing him apart. His instincts as a biker, as a man who had always avoided getting emotionally involved, clashed violently with the desire to protect Amara. This wasn't just about her. This was about everything he had ever known. The angels of hell had no business with innocent bystanders. They were criminals, outlaws. He was an outlaw. And yet, looking at Amara, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had to do something, that he had to protect her, no matter the cost. Bear Mackenzie, the president of the Angels of Hell, entered the room, his presence commanding the attention of everyone in the clubhouse. His face was set in a grim expression, the burden of leadership heavy on his shoulders. Bear had always been a man of action, a leader who commanded respect without saying much. But now, even he was unsure of how to proceed. "Skull, we need to talk," Bear said, his voice calm, but his eyes hard. Skull glanced up, his eyes locking with Bear's, and nodded, signaling for him to continue. Bear motioned for the others to clear the room, and soon, Skull found himself alone with the president, the air thick with the weight of their conversation. "Are you sure about this?" Bear's question hung in the air, cutting through the silence. "You're asking us to go to war with law enforcement, Skull. You're asking the angels to take on a corrupt system that controls everything. This isn't just about helping some girl. This is about sticking our necks out for something we have no business getting involved in. What happens if we fail?" Skull didn't immediately answer. He took a long drag from his cigarette, the tip glowing in the dim light. He knew Bear was right. The Angels of Hell had always been about keeping a low profile, taking what they wanted, and avoiding trouble with the law. Getting mixed up with corrupt cops could lead to consequences neither he nor the club was prepared for. If they went after these cops, they'd be exposing themselves to a dangerous world they had long avoided. But something inside Skull was fighting back against that fear. Amara wasn't just some casualty of war. She was a young woman who had seen her mother's life ripped away by people who were supposed to serve and protect. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that this wasn't just about being a biker. This was about doing what was right. "I can't walk away from this, Bear," Skull said quietly. "She's not just a random victim. She's got the evidence, Bear. She's got the recordings from her mother. The corrupt cops are involved in a massive drug operation, and Amara knows everything. If we don't protect her, they'll kill her. And if we don't act, they'll keep getting away with it. I'm not going to stand by and let that happen. This is bigger than us, bigger than the club." Bear studied him for a moment, his expression unreadable. Finally he sighed, rubbing his temples in frustration. "I get it. I really do. But you're asking us to risk everything. The law doesn't take kindly to people like us sticking their noses into their business. You're talking about starting a war we can't win, Skull. There's no going back once we cross that line." Skull's heart pounded in his chest. He had heard Bear's concerns, but in the end, it didn't matter. He had already made up his mind. Amara wasn't just a girl to him, she was a promise to protect the innocent, to fight for something bigger than the life they had lived as outlaws. "Skull, you have to understand that if we go down this path, it's not just you and Amara who are in danger," Bear warned, his voice more somber now. "The whole club will be exposed. If the law comes for her, they'll come for all of us." "I know," Skull replied, his voice resolute. "But I can't let her face this alone. I won't. And I'm willing to take on whatever comes our way. We've all faced worse, and I'm not about to run now. She's with us, and that means we protect her. End of story." The room fell silent for a long moment, and then Bear nodded slowly, his face hardening with resolve. "All right, Skull. We'll stand by you. But know this, we're all in this together. And if this goes south, it's on all of us. No one walks away from this." Skull nodded, relief flooding his chest. He had his club's backing, but the road ahead would be treacherous. There was no turning back now. As Skull left the room, the weight of his decision still hung heavily on his shoulders. But as he walked toward the back of the clubhouse, where Amara sat alone, staring out the window, he could feel his resolve strengthening. She was the key to everything now. If they were going to bring down the corrupt cops and expose their crimes, Amara held the answers they needed. He sat beside her, the soft hum of the clubhouse's activity fading into the background. "Amara, you're not alone in this anymore. We're going after them, and we won't stop until we take them down." She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a flicker of hope for the first time since he found her behind that gas station dumpster. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to fight this. I'm just so tired of running, of hiding. Skull placed a hand on her shoulder, offering a small smile. You don't have to fight alone. You've got us now, and we'll make sure your mother's death wasn't in vain. Amara nodded, a quiet determination taking root in her chest. My mother recorded everything. The cops, the drugs, the deals, everything. If you can get that to the right people, maybe we can stop them. But I can't do it on my own. I need your help. Her voice was steady now, her strength evident. Skull felt the weight of her words settle into him, her resilience seeping into his bones. Together, they could take on the world. Together, they could bring down the powerful forces that sought to destroy her. And the angels of hell would stand with them. Do you think Skull and Amara can win this fight against the corrupt law enforcement and survive the consequences? How far would you go to protect someone you love, even if it meant risking everything? Drop your thoughts in the comments. The Angels of Hell's clubhouse was eerily quiet, the usual raucous laughter and clinking of bottles replaced by a tense stillness that seemed to hang in the air. It was the night before the final decision would be made, the night before everything would either fall into place or come crashing down. The members of the Angels of Hell were holed up in their corners, deep in thought, weighing the risks of what Skull was asking them to do. The storm outside mirrored the turmoil within, the howling wind echoing the storm of emotions that raged through Skull's mind. He sat alone at the back of the clubhouse, his leather jacket pulled tightly around him, the shadows of the room wrapping him in solitude. His fingers drummed against the tabletop in a rhythmic pattern, though his mind was far from the comforting familiar beats of the motorcycle engine he so loved. No, tonight, his thoughts were consumed with Amara, the girl who had changed everything. When he had first picked her up behind that gas station, his instincts had screamed at him to walk away. She was a civilian, a person outside of their world, a weakness. The Angels of Hell didn't get involved in things like this. They weren't some kind of superhero group, protecting the innocent. They were criminals, living outside the law, bound by their own code of honor and loyalty. But in the days that had followed, the decision had become harder to deny. Amara wasn't just some girl in need of saving. She had become a symbol for everything that was wrong in the world, the kind of thing Skull had fought against his whole life. Corrupt cops, a broken justice system, and a powerful group willing to destroy innocent lives for their own gain. He didn't know when it had happened. He didn't know when Amara had stopped being just a victim in his eyes and started becoming everything he cared about. But here he was, sitting at the edge of this precipice, preparing to jump. Across the room, Amara was curled up on a worn sofa, the light from a single lamp casting long shadows across her face. Her wheelchair sat empty beside her, a constant reminder of the violence that had changed her life. Her body still bore the marks of that night, the bruises on her arms, the visible pain in her eyes. But it wasn't just the physical scars that haunted her. It was the emotional toll that had yet to heal. Skull could see it every time she looked at him, the uncertainty, the fear, the doubt. She was lost in her own darkness, trapped in a past she couldn't outrun. She had been through so much already, and now as the night dragged on, Amara found herself on the edge once more, on the edge of everything she had ever feared. The fear of being hunted down, the fear of losing Skull, the fear of never finding a safe place in the world. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it had ever ticked before, the minutes stretching out as though they held the weight of the world. Finally, she couldn't take it anymore. She wheeled herself over to where Skull was sitting, her eyes never leaving the ground. When she spoke, her voice was small, uncertain. "Skull, are you sure about this?" she asked, her words quiet, as though she were afraid of even voicing her doubt. "I can't keep doing this. I can't keep running. I don't know if I can handle this fight." Skull's gaze shifted from his hands to her face. The lines of worry creased her brow, and the vulnerability in her eyes struck him harder than any enemy ever could. "I'm not going to let you face this alone, Amara," he said, his voice low but firm, the weight of his promise hanging between them. "You don't have to fight it alone. You don't have to do anything alone anymore." She shook her head, her hand gripping the armrest of her wheelchair as if she were trying to hold herself together. "You don't understand," she whispered, almost pleading. "I'm weak, Skull. I'm not strong enough to fight back against them. They have everything, the power, the money, the law on their side. I'm just a crippled girl with nothing left. I'm not important enough to make a difference." Skull's heart twisted in his chest. The rawness in her voice, the desperation, tore through him like a knife. He reached over, placing a hand gently on her shoulder, grounding her to him. Don't say that. Don't think that for 1 second. He stood up, his posture firm, his decision crystal clear. The hesitation he had felt earlier had vanished, replaced by a powerful conviction. You're worth it, Amara. You've been through more than anyone should ever have to. But you're stronger than you know. You don't see it, but I do. I see it every time you look at me, every time you fight for what's right, even when you don't think you can. I don't know if I can keep fighting, she said, her voice barely audible now. I'm scared that I'll just get everyone else killed. I'm scared that I'll never find peace, no matter where I go. Skull knelt down in front of her, his eyes locked on hers with an intensity that made her heart race. The doubt in her eyes, the fear that she couldn't protect herself, hit him harder than anything he had faced on the road. You don't have to find peace alone, he said, his voice unwavering. I'm not asking you to be strong on your own. I'm asking you to let me fight for you. We're in this together, Amara. And I won't back down. I won't leave you. The words settled between them, a promise he wasn't willing to break. For the first time in his life, Skull felt something that wasn't tied to the adrenaline of the ride or the rush of taking down an enemy. This was different. This was real. This was a fight worth having, a fight worth sacrificing everything for. As the storm outside continued to rage, Skull made his decision. Tomorrow, when the rest of the angels of hell would meet to make their final decision, he knew exactly what he would say. He would stand by Amara, no matter the consequences. Even if it meant leaving the only life he had ever known. Even if it meant walking away from the angels of hell forever, choosing Amara over everything he had worked for as a biker. In that moment, he understood what it meant to truly live, to truly fight for something bigger than himself. For Amara, for the chance to make things right, he would do whatever it took. Tomorrow, he said softly, his voice full of conviction. Tomorrow, we take a stand. We fight. And I'm not doing it alone. Amara looked at him, the quiet tears in her eyes finally falling. It wasn't just relief. It was hope. Thank you, Skull. And for the first time since everything had fallen apart, Amara allowed herself to believe that they could win. She could believe in something again. Together, they would face whatever came their way. They would fight. The clubhouse was still, the hum of the storm outside echoing against the heavy walls of the Angels of Hell's sanctuary. The usual sounds of clinking bottles and laughter had been replaced by tense silence as the gang members sat in a wide circle, the decision they were about to make hanging over them like an invisible weight. It wasn't just about the usual business of the angels anymore. This was different. This was personal. The room smelled of cigarettes, sweat, and old leather. The air was thick with the tension of what was at stake, and everyone in that room could feel it. Skull sat in the center, his posture stiff, his eyes heavy with the weight of his decision. Bear Mackenzie, the president of the club, stood at the front of the room, his arms crossed, scanning the faces of the men who had sworn loyalty to him and to each other. He could feel their eyes on him, the unspoken question lingering in the air, what now? The decision was simple on the surface. Protect Amara, the girl who had shown up on Skull's doorstep, broken and hunted. But the consequences of that decision were anything but simple. The angels of hell had always stayed outside the law, always avoided getting caught up in the affairs of the world beyond their bikes. Getting involved in something like this, protecting a civilian, a girl who had witnessed the murder of her mother by corrupt cops, meant risking everything. It meant going head-to-head with law enforcement itself, with the very people who had the power to destroy everything the angels of hell had worked for. The room grew quieter as Bear's gaze moved over the men, their faces a mix of concern and uncertainty. There was no quick answer. No one wanted to be the first to speak up, to voice what they all feared deep down. The cost of protecting Amara could be their lives. I know what you're all thinking, Bear finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was low but firm, carrying the weight of experience. This isn't what we do. We don't get involved in this kind of thing. We stay out of the law's business. But Skull has made his choice. And whether we like it or not, we're all in this together. The room shifted as the members began to murmur among themselves. Cliff, a grizzled veteran of the gang, spoke up first. Protecting her means war, Bear. And war with law enforcement is a death sentence. We don't get to come back from that. The whole city's on their side. What are we supposed to do? Fight them? You really think we can win that fight? The doubt in Cliff's voice was palpable. It mirrored the thoughts of the others in the room, their faces etched with the fear of what lay ahead. The angels of hell had taken down rivals, even enemies in the streets, but law enforcement? That was a different beast altogether. The men who wore badges had the power to erase them from the world, to lock them away forever. Skull knew it, and so did everyone else in the room. Bear nodded slowly, acknowledging the concern, but his expression hardened. I don't like it either. But this isn't about liking it. This is about doing the right thing. Skull made a promise to that girl. And I'll be damned if we let her go down alone. The other gang members exchanged uneasy glances. There was no clear answer. No one wanted to be the one to say it aloud, but they all knew, helping Amara meant stepping into a battle they couldn't afford to lose. So what's the plan? Danny, a younger member of the Angels, asked. His voice was shaky, a mixture of fear and curiosity. He wasn't sure if he was ready for the fight ahead, but the loyalty to Skull was strong in him. Bear exhaled, his eyes meeting Skull's. We prepare. We move in silence. We don't go in guns blazing, not yet. We gather intel. We make sure that when we go to war, we're prepared for the fight of our lives. We're not just protecting Amara, we're protecting our lives too. The room was filled with a somber understanding. They were all agreeing, but no one was happy about it. Skull could feel the weight of his decision pressing in on him even harder now. He had made the choice to protect Amara, but now it was time to face the consequences. Every moment they waited, the stakes grew higher. He could feel the responsibility of the club weighing on his shoulders, each member of the Angels now locked into this fight. If they failed, they would all pay the price. As the meeting continued, the tension only deepened. Skull felt the eyes of his brothers on him, some trusting him completely, others still uncertain. The emotional pull of protecting Amara had brought them to this moment, but it was clear that there would be no turning back. No matter how much they tried to rationalize the risks, there was no escaping the fact that they were about to make an enemy out of the law itself. Later that night, after the meeting had broken up, Skull found himself back in the quiet of the dimly lit room where Amara had been staying. She was sitting in the corner, her wheelchair turned slightly away from the door. She had been listening, he knew it. The silence between them was thick with the unspoken truth. They've agreed, Skull said as he walked over to her, his voice heavy. He sat down beside her, looking into her eyes. The Angels of Hell are with us. We're going to protect you, no matter what it costs. Amara looked up at him, her eyes wide, the relief in her expression only slightly masking the fear still gripping her heart. I don't know if I can do this, Skull. I don't know if I'm strong enough. Skull reached out and gently placed his hand on her shoulder. The promise in his eyes was clear. You don't have to be strong alone, Amara. You're not alone anymore. We're in this together, and I'm not backing down. Not for you. Not for your mother's sacrifice. We'll make sure her death wasn't in vain. His voice softened as he looked at her, the gravity of his words settling over them both. I made a promise to you, Amara. And I don't care what it costs me. I'll keep it. She nodded, her eyes brimming with gratitude, and for the first time in a long time, the flicker of hope returned to her face. She wasn't just another victim. She was part of something bigger now, something that would fight for her, for what was right. And Skull would make sure they saw it through, no matter the cost. Do you think Skull and the Angels of Hell can protect Amara and win this fight against the corrupt cops? How far would you go to protect someone you love, even if it meant risking everything? Share your thoughts in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more gripping emotional stories filled with intense action and moral dilemmas. The dim lights of the city slowly faded behind them as Skull and Amara rode down a long deserted highway. The air was crisp and clean, a far cry from the smog-choked streets of the city they had left behind. The storm clouds had cleared, and the first signs of dawn painted the sky in shades of lavender and orange. It felt like the start of something new, something they both desperately needed. The decision to leave the Angels of Hell had been the hardest thing Skull had ever done. It wasn't just about walking away from a life he'd known for years, it was about giving up everything he had worked for, his brothers, his legacy, the camaraderie of the Angels. But Amara had shown him what it meant to protect someone, to love without hesitation, without fearing the cost. She had become his reason to fight, his reason to change. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but it was theirs to navigate now. By the time they reached their destination, the sun had fully risen, casting long golden shadows over the small town that would be their new home. Skull parked the bike in front of a modest two-story house, far away from the life they had known. It wasn't much, just a place to start over, a place to breathe without the looming threat of law enforcement or the angels of hell. As Skull stepped off the bike, Amara wheeled herself to the front door, her eyes wide as she took in their new surroundings. The small house was quiet, peaceful, everything the chaotic life they had left behind was not. For the first time in what felt like forever, she could breathe without fear, without the constant weight of terror pressing down on her chest. "It's not much, but it's ours," Skull said, his voice soft as he looked at the house. His hands were still trembling slightly from the weight of their decisions, but for the first time in days, a sense of calm washed over him. "It's perfect," Amara whispered, her voice shaky as she looked up at him, tears welling in her eyes. She had never imagined a life like this, one where she could escape the pain, the fear, and the ghosts of the past. For so long, she had been on the run, never knowing what it felt like to truly be safe. But now, she felt a flicker of hope. They both knew that their fight wasn't over, far from it. The law was still after them. Eleanor, Skull's former life, and the powerful enemies who sought to destroy Amara were still out there, lurking in the shadows. But for the first time in a long time, they had the luxury of time to heal, to figure out what came next. Later that night, after settling into their new home, Skull and Amara sat on the couch, the quiet of their surroundings a stark contrast to the chaos of the days that had led them here. The weight of everything, the club, the corruption, the violence, was still with them, but for the first time, it didn't feel suffocating. Amara sat close to him, her head resting on his shoulder, the warmth of his body grounding her to the present. She wasn't sure how long it would take for the scars of the past to fade, or if they ever would, but for the first time, she felt safe. Skull's steady presence beside her was a comfort she hadn't known she needed. "Do you ever think about the past?" she asked quietly, her voice soft, the weight of her words hanging in the air. "I try not to," Skull replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But I don't regret what we've done. We've chosen this life, a new life. It's not perfect, but it's ours." His hand rested on hers, his fingers interlacing with hers, and for the first time, she felt the full force of his commitment. He had left the angels of hell behind, walked away from the only family he had ever known to protect her. The sacrifice was immense, but in this moment, it felt like everything was worth it. Amara looked up at him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You didn't have to do this for me, Skull. You could have walked away, gone back to your life." "I didn't want to walk away from you, Amara," Skull whispered, his thumb gently brushing her knuckles. "I've never wanted anything more than to make sure you're safe, that you're okay. I promised I wouldn't let anyone hurt you, and I'll keep that promise." Tears welled in Amara's eyes, but she didn't try to hide them. She let them fall freely, feeling the weight of her grief and relief mix in her chest. She had lost everything, but now she had something, someone, who would stand by her side through the storm. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Skull," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved me. You gave me a chance to live again." "We saved each other," he replied, his voice steady, yet filled with the raw truth of their shared struggle. "We're in this together, Amara. No matter what comes next, we'll face it together." In the quiet of their new home, surrounded by the stillness of the world outside, Skull held Amara close. They had made it this far, and though they knew the fight wasn't over, for the first time in a long time, they felt the comfort of being able to breathe, to rest. They weren't running anymore. They weren't hiding. As the evening wore on, Skull and Amara fell into a comfortable silence. The world outside was still a threat, but here in their small house, they had something they hadn't had before: peace. But even as they settled into their new life, they both knew that peace was fleeting. The corrupt law enforcement who had murdered Amara's mother were still out there, hunting her. The angels of hell would have enemies of their own to face if they were caught aiding and abetting a civilian. Skull stood at the window, looking out at the quiet street, the shadows creeping along the sidewalk. He knew that this life wasn't going to be easy. But it didn't matter. He had Amara, and together, they would face whatever came next. He had made his choice, and for the first time, he felt like he had a purpose greater than the angels of hell, greater than anything he had ever known. Amara joined him at the window, her wheelchair rolling beside him. Together, they stood, looking out into the uncertain future that awaited them. But whatever came, they would face it side by side. They were no longer victims. They were survivors, and they had each other. The night stretched on, but for the first time, it didn't feel so dark. What would you do if you had to make a choice between your past and your future? Do you think Skull and Amara can truly escape the dangerous forces after them, or will their past catch up with them? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more emotional and action-packed stories like this one.